So, good morning, everyone. And thank you, Cafemutual, for organizing this event, giving me the opportunity to share this stage with many other great speakers. And I thought to myself, what has happened in the market for the last 1 year, 1.5 years, the returns that equities have given, should one do, what can I say in this stage? And I thought to myself, let me try and do something different. I don't want to talk about, let's say, market valuations. I want to avoid talking about which market caps to choose, which sectors to look at, which sectors to avoid. I will not touch upon inflation or interest rate or which central bank will pivot when. I want to do something different. Let me take a chance here. I want to talk about something that I consider, that we at Union Mutual Fund consider to be far more important, but something that quite often in our conversations on a day-to-day basis gets overlooked or sidelined. And that is the story of what our great country has achieved over the years and where it is slated to go. And in order to give a context to my talk, let me show you a small video clip. Can we have the video, please? Thank you. It's a catchy song. No wonder it got nominated for Oscars. But still, despite this being the fact, many a times I've been asked these questions, Hardik, why do you believe that this kind of growth can happen? And why is it important? There's so much of poverty, corruption, the infrastructure is in shambles, there is unemployment. Is this really possible? Are we really living in a pipe dream? And I completely empathize with the skeptics. If you're too close to the problem, sometimes our day-to-day problems are keeping us aloof from what the reality and what the history is. If you stand too close to a painting in a museum, you will not be able to see it in its entirety. That, as we say, you miss the forest for the trees. So let me do one thing. Let me take you through a journey. Let me show you what has happened in the country for the last 15 years and tell you whether really India is growing or not and why it's growing. So for any nation to grow, it is not enough for the nation to grow itself. The population also has to participate in the growth and get richer. Otherwise, what's the point in the growth, right? So let's look at one metric, which is GDP per capita. So in 2006, an average Indian contributed about $800 to India's GDP. After 15 years, that number has gone up to $2,280 per capita. This is a 3x growth. And this growth basically means that while the population is only growing by 1%, their wealth is growing at a faster pace and they are getting richer, which means they are spending in different areas. But of the top 10 countries that we showed in the video, does anybody want to take a guess what those top 10 countries' average populations per capita GDP is? That's at $43,000. So despite this 3x growth, there is still a long way to go. There is still a 19x growth to be had. That's what keeps us excited. And if this extra income is generated per person, where is it getting spent? What has happened in the last 5 years? Where has that Indian spent that extra rupee that they've earned? So let's look at the basics. Let's look at something as basic as nutrition. If you look at the amount of fat in terms of grams per day that was available to an Indian, let's say in 2004, that was 45 grams of fat they had access to and were consuming. That number in the next 20 years or 15 years has gone up to 60 grams. Not a big jump. We have been pretty self-sufficient in terms of nutrition. And in fact, what WHO also says is you need about 80 to 100 grams of fat per day to basically meet your nutritional requirement. And we're not very far from that number. In fact, the global average of those top 10 nations also is 138 grams. So as you can see, there is not much of a move that is going to happen because we are self-sufficient, at least in this particular aspect. In fact, even if you look at calories consumed per person per day, then that number also is at 2,200 odd calories per day. That was the number 2004. After 15 years, that number has gone up to 2,500. This is also what WHO's recommended calorie consumption per day is roughly. Of course, the leading nations, the top 10 nations, total average is about 3,400, but we have already made this gap. Why am I showing this slide is the basics are captured. Let's go beyond the basics, and that's where the fun starts. That's where it gets interesting. Let's take electricity. If you look at how much electricity was available to an average Indian in 2007 for the year, they had about 670 kilowatt hours of electricity available to them for the whole year. This number has gone up by almost 2 times to 1,200 kilowatt hours. Now, if you have a basic household which has 2 or 3 appliances and is running throughout the year with 4-member household, typically you would require about 5,000 units per household per year. The average of the top 10 nations, they consume about 8,000 kilowatt hours. There's a 7x growth to be had here as well. If not 7, at least 5x growth. This is where the Indians are spending. If we consume more electricity, we buy more appliances, we own more, we use more internet, we will use electricity and we will require it, and that's where the capex happens. So even if the population is growing by only 1%, the pace at which we are consuming more electricity is growing at 5% faster. If we move further, another data point that I think is very interesting, very often talked about, vehicle ownership. For every 1,000 Indians in 2007, we had 25 vehicles, and that number has gone up to 59 vehicles, more than 2 times the growth in the last 15 years, 15, 13 years. And if you look at the average for the top 10 nations again over here, for every 1,000 people in those countries, they have 628 vehicles. This includes cars, buses, trucks, tractors, everything except for two-wheelers. And here also the growth runway to be had is huge. Although we have seen a strong growth, there is still a strong growth yet to be achieved. Another data point will be very interesting to you. We know how Jio and Airtel, these companies have come on board and how the penetration of telecommunication has happened. In 2005, only 2% of our population was using internet. That number has gone up to 43% in 2020. So despite the penetration, there is only less than half our population that is using internet actually, not having access, this is the usage. And if you compare this with, again, I think this is needless to say, the top 10 countries average is almost 87. They're almost the entire population, leave aside maybe some of the people, but most of them are actually using internet. So here, despite the growth, there is still more growth to be had. Interesting point that I found to be most interesting when I was also doing research on this, air travel. If you look at how many kilometers an average Indian traveled by air in 2005, that was about 36 passenger kilometers. Now I was checking, from Borivali to Churchgate, it's about 40 kilometers. So the distance traveled by people by air was that low. This is because only a fraction of the population was traveling by air, and that's why if you divided the entire journeys traveled by the population, the number was that low. As the penetration has increased, this has gone up to 173 kilometers per year traveled by an average Indian. And again, if you were to look at the top 10 nations and their average, they are traveling about 3,000 kilometers per year. And this is not just the story for what's going to happen. There is genuinely an improvement that has happened. When I said an economy has to grow, and it has to grow with taking its population also ahead with it, that is also looked at by one more data which I found very encouraging. If you look at the number of people, the percentage of population living in extreme poverty, we had 40% of our population living in extreme poverty in 2004. And while I know we keep saying and looking around and thinking, okay, India is a poor country, but the number has fallen to 10% in 15 years. And I'm very hopeful that we will move in line with the top 10 nations and have almost nobody living in extreme poverty in the years to come, because this has happened. And no matter which industries you pick, you will see this kind of growth everywhere, whether it's credit cards, whether it's insurance, or how many robots do we have in our manufacturing facilities, or how much household debt we have as a percentage of GDP. What is the equity market participation? How many of us go to quick service restaurants? Everywhere there is so much growth to be had despite the growth that we have achieved, and this data the list can just go on. And why am I talking about just what Indians are consuming? Why is consumption the story, right? Everybody's talking about manufacturing and all that. But consumption is important because 55% of our GDP is driven by private consumption. It is when this big cog starts moving, it starts putting gears for the other cogs. So when we buy more cars, when we have more electrical appliances, when we use more electricity, we access more internet, we fly more frequently by air or wherever, that basically requires industries to put up more capacity to give it to the consumers. This is how the structure starts. If we own more cars, the government has to set up more roads for us to travel those cars on. So this has been the history. On average, 55% of our GDP has always been driven by private consumption. That cog itself is going to grow at a very fast pace, is the point I was trying to make. And when I say all these points, it's not a matter of just hope. If you look at the last 15 years of data, from 2004 to 2019, India was at that time also the top 10 fastest growing nations. We just don't rank ourselves to see where we are standing, but we have been one of the top 10 fastest growing nations back then also. So when I tell you that we will be the top 10 fastest growing nations for the years to come, it is not just a matter of hope. It is only a matter of time. Again, if someone was to further drill me and say, why are we talking about growth? Why is it so important for us to be growing faster than others? I mean, we are growing, it's fine. But what is the importance of being faster? And I think the answer to that is the ovarian lottery. In 1997's Berkshire Hathaway annual general meeting, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger were basically talking about investment success and how individuals are able to generate return and how much they should be taxed on their capital gains. And they made a very interesting point. They gave a quiz to the team, to the audience, and they said, if you were to choose where you will be born in the next 24 hours, where will you choose yourself to be born? And he said that for them, the choice was made. They were lucky to be born in the US. They said the odds of them being born in US were 30 against 30 to 1. And that was a huge plus for them. They would not be worth a dime in a country like Afghanistan. And let that sink in. The world's greatest investors are also forthright in attributing their success to where they were born. They were born in the right country at the right time, at the right place. And friends, we also have today won the genetic lottery. We are born in a country at a time where we are going to experience this supernormal growth. So while we will discuss about market valuations and STP and whether we should participate in what manner, that is a part of our job and we will do that. Let's not lose sight of what is more important. The bountiful growth that our country offers, the fact that whether we believe it or not, the country will go, the elephant will not only just march, it will run, and we all have a chance to ride it. So that's it from me. With that, I thank you and happy investing.